So I am here today. Oh, thank you to Claudia for the lovely introduction. Thank you to Tree for having me, for letting me do this. My dead poet that I'll be talking a bit about tonight is William Carlos Williams. And actually, I'm concentrating more on his book Spring and All, which I think is one of the finest books of poetry ever written. Forgive the kind of format that I use. I am an English major at Carleton. It's going to read like a English paper. I'm not recycling it. It's not an old paper or something that I'm reading. But I'll just get started because I'm going to run out of time otherwise. So I even gave it an English majory title. William Carlos Williams' Spring and All, at the petal's edge is two. William Carlos Williams was born in Rutherford, New Jersey on September 17, 1883, to an English father and a Puerto Rican mother. He married Florence Herman in 1912 after his first proposal to her older sister was refused. They moved into a house in Rutherford, New Jersey, which was their home for many years, as Williams refused to follow T.S. Eliot and others to Europe, instead excelling at home in, of all places for a poet, New Jersey. Williams is also a pediatrician and general practitioner of medicine who, quote, worked harder at being a writer than he did at being a physician, end quote. Williams died on March 4th, 1963, and is now widely known as an American modernist and one of the original American Imagist poets, who would also go on to influence Beat Generation poets like Allen Ginsberg, the Black Mountain poets and Charles Olson, as well as the modernists in Montreal and BC like Louis Dudek and Ray Souster, who caught the modernism train late. So before I say too much about the man, I'm just going to read a poem as a bit of an introduction to the topics that I'm going to be exploring. And the poem that I'm going to read is not The Red Wheelbarrow. You should know that one already. I'm going to start with composition. This is number 12 in the book. The red paper box hinged with cloth is lined inside and out with imitation leather. It is the sun, the table with dinner on it, for these are the same. Its 2-inch trays have engineers that convey glue to airplanes, or for old ladies that darn socks, paper clips, and red elastics. What is the end to insects that suck gummed labels? For this is eternity. Through its dial we discover transparent tissue on a spool, but the stars are round cardboard with a tin edge and a ring to fasten them to a trunk for the vacation. At the time when Williams was writing Spring and All, which he released in 1923, The Wasteland, released in 1922, was one of the, quote, major influences on that remarkable volume, which viewed the same American landscape as Eliot, but interpreted it differently, unquote. Williams saw that his poetic task was to affirm the, quote, self-reliant, sympathetic consciousness of Whitman in a broken, industrialized world, unquote. But unlike Eliot, who responded negatively to the harsh realities of the modern march, Williams saw his task as breaking through restrictions and generating growth. Williams inevitably saw potential for growth in things, objects, tables, iceboxes, plums, as a form of escapism from the psychological modernist concerns outlined in The Wastelands by using the presence of things like wet, red wheelbarrows to remind us of the vastness in poetry and everyday surroundings, rather than imposing one's own emotion on objects, forcing them to be the stuff of poems. Williams sees the real function of the imagination as breaking through the alienation of the near at hand and reviving its wonder. As Williams himself explains in one of Spring and All's prose passages, quote, imagination is not to avoid reality, nor is it a description nor an evocation of objects or situations. It is to say that poetry does not tamper with the world but moves it. It affirms reality most powerfully, and therefore, since reality needs no personal support but exists free from human action, as proven by science and the indestructibility of matter and of force, it creates a new object. Williams's prose pieces are intense manifestos in the vein of Dada and Marinetti, but also profoundly compelling and sturdy as a set kitchen table at times. The poems try not to describe at all, but to fuse the imagination with the things he was contemplating, quote, inevitably coaxing the poem into behaving in such a way that the objects within it become real and understood additions to nature, unquote. An example of Williams's additions can be seen in the second poem in Spring and All called The Pot of Flowers. And before I read, note that Williams's pot is not a pot of flowers, but the pot of flowers. This is the second poem in the book. Pink confused with white, flowers and flowers reversed, take and spill the shaded flame, darting it back into the lamp's horn. Petals aslant darkened with mauve, red where in whorls petal lays its glow upon petal, round flame-green throats, petals radiant with trans-piercing light, contending above the leaves, reaching up their modest green from the pot's rim, and there, wholly dark, the pot, gay with rough moss. Like many modernist poems of the time, Williams' The Pot of Flowers seems to set a scene that is similar to Ezra Pound's In the Station of a Metro, wherein we, or those living and toiling in such uncertain and modern times, are likened to petals, fixed in our current struggle, unable to reach beyond it. In fact, Williams begins the poem by establishing an era of confusion when he writes pink confused with white, or the words reversed, spill, and the shaded flame. However, the petals fall into a larger hierarchy that is contained in the vastness of the image of the pot. Indeed, the petals are above the leaves and, quote, radiant with trans-piercing light, end quote, suggesting that the petals, or once again the general we, have seemingly risen, or, at the very least, desire an escape to a sublime stage, thinking our only salvation is in the sky, the stars, and other intangible symbols. The modest green leaves are also reaching, though the idea of modesty suggests that the leaves symbolizing here the natural world are not reaching to attain a higher plane, rather they are reaching as Williams reaches, for us, to bring us back down out of our own self-imposed and trans-piercing light. However, the base of the image that Williams is setting up here is the pot gay with rough moss, which acts as a means of fusing the disparate connection between the petals and the leaves, or between the progress, industry, and psychology of modernity with the natural world that quickly became secondary to such bourgeois modernist concerns. The pot is shot through with the tensions of either world. As it is indeed an inanimate object or a product made with the sweat of men to contain nature, it is also overrun with rough moss, suggesting that Williams is creating a new object, one that refuses classical categorization, and is thus, in a sense, outlining how to affirm reality through imaginative means. The pot is in fact gay with rough moss, suggesting that there is a wholeness to the image, that the tensions with which the image is shot through have crystallized, rendering something seemingly inanimate wholly dynamic. Indefinitely, Williams' poetry here is not of observation, rather the world has been no less than moved, changed, made new. Just as meeting Pound had profoundly affected Williams' early life, the appearance of Eliot's The Wasteland marked important changes in his mid-career. Though some of Williams' finest poetry appeared in Spring and All, he did not release another book of poems for nearly 10 years. One reason, speculated Williams scholar Rod Townley, was, quote, probably Eliot's success. Another may have been his own success, known only to a few in Spring and All. For decades thereafter, he could not outdo himself. Some think he never did. Though Williams is admittedly a new poet for me, in the sense that I was only familiar with two of his heavily anthologized poems, The Red Wheelbarrow and This Is Just to Say, what I found after reading Spring and All is that Williams' books smacked with the stuff of some of my favorite artists, creators like David Lynch and John Thompson, and I found a quote from Townley that really sums up my favorite approach to art, as Townley outlines in reference to Williams' Spring and All when he says, quote, even for poets, coming at Williams' meaning is a process more often of pursuing inferences than of ingesting immediately usable information. One of the finest examples of this, and indeed one of the finest poems I think that has ever been written, is from Williams' Spring and All, called The Right of Way, which I will read for you now. Although using a Williams poem to close anything, as you will see when you read Spring and All, is extremely problematic. At the very least, I hope it leads to more thinking, to something new, to one of Williams' editions, The Right of Way. In passing with my mind on nothing in the world but the right of way I enjoy on the road by virtue of the law, I saw an elderly man who smiled and looked away, to the north, past a house. A woman in blue who was laughing and leaning forward to look up into the man's half-averted face, and a boy of 8 who was looking at the middle of the man's belly at a watch chain. The supreme importance of this nameless spectacle sped me by them without a word. Why bother where I went? For I went spinning on the four wheels of my car along the wet road until I saw a girl with one leg over the rail of a balcony. Thank you.